You are standing in a crowded room, and the air is dense. Not because of humidity, because of smoke. It hangs over the office, the restaurant, the waiting room, the airplane aisle. Hands keep rising to mouths. Ash collects in trays as if this is just what adulthood looks like. In the United States, adult cigarette smoking was still about 42.4% in 1965, which is why scenes like this did not feel dramatic at the time. They felt normal. The explanation seemed simple. Cigarette companies got good at selling a bad product. They marketed it hard, engineered it to be addictive, and trapped millions of people before the public understood the cost. That is only one part of the story. People were using tobacco long before any modern tobacco company existed, and not in a boardroom-made 20th century way. Tobacco use was already established in the Americas in ritual and ceremonial contexts, with meanings that varied by culture. So the basic act of putting fire to a leaf and drawing it into your body did not start as a corporate trick. It started as a human behavior that already had a function for people. And that matters because the bigger mystery is not why people started. It is why they kept going after the danger was obvious. To get there, you have to go back much further than the cigarette pack. The earliest direct archaeological evidence for human tobacco use comes from the Wishbone site in present-day Utah, about 12,300 years ago. So humans were deliberately using tobacco deep in prehistory, thousands upon thousands of years before branding, mass advertising, or factory production. What started as an ancient habit became industrial, and the scale changed massively. After 1492, tobacco was one of the American crops carried into the Old World through the Columbian Exchange. It moved across the Atlantic, entered European trade networks, and became lucrative, a profit to be made. A plant that had existed in specific cultural settings was now a commodity. Once merchants can move it, states can tax it, and markets can normalize it, it becomes portable, repeatable, sellable, not universal overnight, but headed there. Over time, tobacco stopped being just something people encountered in specific contexts and became something entire societies could encounter every day. Then modern industry compressed that process even further. A behavior that once depended on place, preparation, and custom could now be bought in a pocket-sized, standardized form. You did not need a ritual setting. You needed a match. That is how an old human practice becomes a modern mass habit. Then, war gives it speed. Picture one serviceman in World War II opening his U.S. C ration. He is tired, young, far from home, surrounded by other men doing the same thing at the same time. In the accessory kit, there is a commercial cigarette pack, not as a luxury, as a routine inclusion. By World War II, U.S. C rations commonly included cigarette packs this way, helping make daily smoking routine for many servicemen. That one detail explains a lot. You do not need every soldier to start because of the ration for the effect to be huge. You just need cigarettes to be folded into the rhythm of ordinary life. After meals, during waiting, under stress, with friends, with boredom, with fear, a war can do that fast. It can take millions of people at the exact age when habits form, put them into a shared system, and make smoking look practical, social, and expected. Then those men go home. Now the habit is not just available, it is attached to adulthood, masculinity, camaraderie, relief, and routine. And the culture they return to is ready to receive it. Post-war cigarette advertising did not present smoking as reckless or fringe. It presented it as respectable, familiar, even trustworthy. One of the most famous Camel campaigns claimed that more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. That sounds absurd now. At the time, it worked because it fit the surrounding reality. Smoking was not hidden, it was everywhere. If you are growing up in a world where the adults around you smoke, the men coming back from war smoke, and even ads borrow medical authority to reassure you, then smoking does not read as a deviant act. It reads as belonging. So when did the spell break? Officially, the clearest turning point came on January 11, 1964. That is when the U.S. Surgeon General released the landmark report, concluding that cigarette smoking was causally related to lung cancer in men and to chronic bronchitis. This is the moment many people imagine as the great snap of public understanding. The government says it plainly. The evidence is state-backed. The danger is no longer rumor or scattered suspicion or something you can dismiss as bad luck. And yet the room did not clear. Even after the 1964 report, U.S. adult smoking stayed above 40% through the later 1960s and only declined gradually over decades. That is the part that can feel almost irrational from a distance. If the warning was that clear, why did behavior move so slowly? Because information does not trigger behavior changes. A cigarette was not just nicotine in paper. It was built into breaks at work, into the hand that needed something to do at a party, into the pause after an argument, into the 5 minutes outside with another smoker, into the signal that you were grown, hard, calm, busy, glamorous, unfazed. One of the group, or briefly alone. If you only explain smoking as a chemical dependency, you miss why proof of harm did not cause an immediate collapse. People often said cigarettes helped them manage stress or mood. Research summaries complicate that claim. The calming effect smokers feel is largely the temporary easing of nicotine withdrawal, not a net removal of stress from their lives. That means the cigarette can feel like medicine for a discomfort it is also helping create. The act comes wrapped in ritual, the hand movement, the pause, the excuse to step outside, the company, the identity. That is why nicotine replacement therapy could help some people quit and still not solve the whole problem by itself. Cigarettes spread and persisted because they were sold as an identity and a coping tool laid on top of a chemical hook, so removing the chemical alone was never going to be enough to make people stop. Once you see that, the long delay after 1964 makes more sense. The health evidence mattered. Of course it mattered. But the big behavioral shift came when the entire environment started changing around the cigarette at the same time. The eventual decline in U.S. smoking was driven by accumulated pressure from taxes, smoke-free laws, public education, litigation, and marketing restrictions, not by the health evidence alone. In other words, people did not just learn new facts. They entered a new world. A cigarette became more expensive, then less convenient, then less glamorous, then less socially neutral, then harder to use indoors, harder to advertise, harder to present as ordinary, and harder to mistake for harmless. The culture that once carried smoking forward began pushing against it from multiple directions at once. That is what finally moved the habit from mainstream to marginal. Not one law, not one lawsuit, not one report. A stack of pressures, sustained over years, strong enough to break the old alignment between the product and everyday life. And when that alignment broke, the numbers followed. By 2024, U.S. adult cigarette smoking had fallen below 10% for the first time. By 2025, preliminary CDC survey data put it at about 9%. That is a collapse so large it is easy to forget how recently the opposite world existed. The smoky room was not ancient history. It was your grandparents' adulthood. In one lifetime, something that looked nearly built into social life became unusual. But notice what did not disappear completely. By that same 2025 preliminary CDC picture, adult e-cigarette use was around 7%. The old functions did not vanish just because cigarette use fell. The need for a ritual, a pause, a self-soothing device, a social signal, a thing to do with your hands and your nerves, can migrate. When one form becomes costly, stigmatized, restricted, and culturally out of date, another form can inherit part of the role. So the story is not that humans were duped into inhaling smoke by one ingenious industry and then rescued by one heroic report. The deeper story is that an ancient practice was turned into a mass commodity, embedded into daily life by trade, war, and culture, publicly condemned by medicine, and then slowly dismantled only when the world around it changed enough to make the habit stop fitting. That is why quitting smoking was historically so difficult. You were not only trying to stop taking a drug, you were trying to remove a schedule, a social tool, a private relief valve, and in some cases, a version of yourself. For millions of people, the cigarette was there, in grief, in boredom, on the factory floor, after dinner, outside the bar, before the meeting, after the meeting, on the drive home. It occupied tiny spaces all through the day until those spaces started to feel shaped for it. Then the spaces changed. The office changed. The restaurant changed. The ad changed. The price changed. The law changed. The meaning changed. And once the meaning changed, the old object could not hold its place as easily. So let's go back to that room. Same species. Same anxieties. Same need to take the edge off. To belong. To mark a break in the day. But now, nobody in it is holding a cigarette. The room learned a different way to breathe.